Hello and welcome back to Williams Educational Consultants. I am Wendy Williams, founder of Williams Educational, and I'm really excited to have Dr. Maggie Wray, who is an academic and executive function coach, and started her own business, Creating Positive Futures. And Maggie, you've been around for a very long time, and I've had the real pleasure of watching you grow and add more coaches to your company and help students nationwide. And so thank you so much for coming in and talking to me with the viewers listening about executive functioning and really how to support these high school students that are going off to college.
Absolutely. It's so fun. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, before we get started, I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself and the company and how you got involved in this great organization you created.
Absolutely. Well, we have been around for a while now, so we celebrated our 10-year anniversary last year, which was really exciting.
Yay.
And we really started out to create something that I didn't see that existed for students. So I've found that a lot of times students are getting, especially as academic challenges have gotten harder and harder, and there's been more and more pressure for students to take on more AP classes and to have this challenge in their academic curriculum. They're not necessarily learning those executive functioning skills about how to handle the level of challenge that they're coming up against. So I experienced that when I transitioned to college. That was actually the biggest academic struggle I ever had, was going from I would say, relatively easy public high school into a really challenging private college and getting hit with the difficulty of that. And it really hurt my confidence as a student. And I felt like, oh my gosh, if I can't do this well, like who am I even? Like my identity was really wrapped up in getting good grades and being a good student. And it was so challenging to make that transition. And there was no support. I mean, I went to see some tutors and I went to the counseling center, but like none of that really seemed like it was what I needed. I needed some support. And how do I actually do school well? How do I manage my time? How do I study effectively? How do I keep myself motivated to keep going through exam after exam after exam? And um, none of that's getting taught, and there's not space in the curriculum for that to get taught. Teachers might want to help their students, but they also don't get specialized training on how to really support students with those skills. And we know executive functioning develops over the lifespan, but it's not something that's necessarily being taught, and teaching those skills can have a real impact and a real difference in students' ability to keep up with academic challenges and to manage their workload well and to really feel confident in their abilities as a student. And so that was what I was trying to create, was how do we create an opportunity for students to get that kind of support in a way that feels really positive, really encouraging, really motivating for them. It's not something that's wrong with them or bad about them that they don't have those skills. They just haven't learned them yet. That's all.
Right.
And so it's something that they can do. Even if their school doesn't provide it, we can be here as a resource for them outside of the school system for them to really utilize and to help set them up for success.
Well, it's been fantastic. It's a great resource here locally. And I know that families that have utilized your service always speaks volumes about the results. So it's great to have you here. I think that one of the things all high school students struggle with is that transition. They receive support in the high school classroom, or you had grade inflation, or you were able to really go in and build that relationship with the high school teacher, and then transitioning over to the college setting, it's a different beast. And yes, colleges do have, college students that are getting paid for tutoring. Sometimes they have resources. They have different departments that offer tutoring, but it's really specialized when we talk about that executive functioning piece, and then how to do the time management or the organization. So do students have to have a diagnosis to work with you?
No, not at all. Now, some students do. We do work with a lot of students who have ADHD, who have anxiety. They might have social anxiety, especially in the college setting. That could be really challenging because it's hard for them to get support or go into their academic support office or go talk to their professor. So there are a lot of different diagnoses that students can have. We work with students who are on the spectrum. That can have its own unique set of challenges. So there are a lot of different students that we work with who do have a diagnosis, but also we work with a lot of students who are neurotypical kids. There's no particular diagnosis. They're just facing a lot of academic challenges, and they would like to figure out better ways to cope with that and handle that. So executive functioning struggles can show up when you have a diagnosis, but they can also just show up because you're a person who's trying to take on a lot in your life and you're trying to challenge yourself and do difficult things. And I think everybody can relate to that, where they've maybe had a time in their life where they felt like their skills were not up to the level of challenge that they were facing in their life. And if they could have had better strategies to manage their time or to learn more effectively, or to stay focused or engaged or motivated, all of those skills can be really helpful. So I don't like to tell students that they are coming here because they're broken or wrong or bad or something different about them. And if they do have a diagnosis, we want to try to help them figure out what are the strengths of that diagnosis. So for example, with ADHD, there are a ton of strengths that go along with that. You know, your energy and your ability to hyper focus in on those areas that you're interested in. And there are a lot of strengths, and it can depend on obviously the student. It looks different in every student. So I never want to generalize, but I want to say if they have a diagnosis, we will use that. We take the psych ed if they've had an evaluation, and those can be really helpful in helping them identify the different ways that they can learn effectively. We also can help set them up with the support that they need. For example, if they're going to get accommodations at school, sometimes students don't think about that, or they think, well, I'll get them if I need them, but they're not realizing that they actually, there's a lag. You can't just wait till your first exam and then say, oh, shoot, I wish I had extra time, and go set those up before your next exam next week. It's not that fast and it's not that easy. So we can help them get the support that they need in place if they have a diagnosis and have access to some more services. But if they don't have a diagnosis, they can also take advantage of coaching and get a lot of value out of that as well.
So coaching is a highlight of your practice. And I think that is something very different than the tutoring side. You're not a tutor, that you're not set up to be that piece. So can you kind of talk about coaching and what that looks like for a student and how that differs from tutoring or counseling or that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. It is a different type of support. And I think it's helpful for students to understand that when they're coming in the door is we're not going to sit down with you and teach you calculus. The great thing about colleges is they actually have a lot of free tutoring. So they have peer tutoring, they have often free tutoring, free learning centers, support. There's a ton of tutoring that's available at the college level that's just free that you can walk in and take advantage of. The problem is a lot of times students either aren't taking advantage of it because they don't know it's there. They haven't read through the syllabus in great detail. You think about a kid who's got struggles with executive function, or who's just overwhelmed because they've got 5 college classes. It's their first time in school in a college level. They might not even be aware of the importance of reading a syllabus. They might get it and throw it in their bag and never look at it again. So even understanding where to find the resources or how to schedule the time in their schedule to go get the resources, or like thinking ahead and planning ahead to realize, oh, it's going to be really busy at the tutoring center the day before the exam. Maybe I need to pre-plan that, and I'll go in the week before the exam when there's less of a crowd and I can get the help I need a little easier, rather than walking in the day before and there's 60 kids in there and I can't get my questions answered. All of those things are not a given. So tutoring is, I would say, really based on the content. So all of that support is wrapped around, okay, I'm going to teach you the ideas. It's almost like you're getting extra instruction. So like a supplementary class. So you go to class and you learn the material, and then you go to tutoring and you get extra instruction on the material. That's fantastic, but it's not necessarily going to teach you how to study, how to learn, how to focus, how to organize, how to manage your schedule. So that's kind of the tutoring difference. What the therapy side, or the coaching difference between coaching and counseling. If you're going to go to counseling center, often there is an overlap. So we see a lot of students who are also in counseling or also in therapy. I love therapy and counseling. It's amazing. And I think it really can help students work through, for example, that like self-worth thing where I was saying my self-worth was really wrapped up in my grades. Like that sense of self is really tied to accomplishments. And like, I feel like this need to achieve in order to feel like I'm okay and like I'm enough. That's the therapy thing. Like that's something that you work through in therapy, and that you, and it can be really helpful to work through if you have issues with, you're feeling very anxious all the time. If you have any sort of disorder, or like a student has an eating disorder, a student who's really struggling with drinking too much, just saying no to friends, like any sort of thing like that, they're going to want to probably see a therapist or counselor about that. What the therapist can sometimes really enjoy about them, the student having a coach as well, is that their therapist is not equipped to help you figure out when your next test is coming up and how you're going to study and how you're going to go talk to your professor and when that's going to happen. Like all the logistics that go into being a good student, they don't have time to talk about that or bandwidth to think about that. And it's going to distract from all the underlying issues. So if a student's overwhelmed by the day-to-day, like, oh my gosh, I've got 15 things to do for tomorrow and I don't know how to handle those because I have no way of planning or no system of keeping up with that. It's going to heighten their anxiety. If they have depression, it's going to make their depression worse.
Right.
So if you have really poor executive functioning skills or you're not managing your day-to-day responsibilities well, it's going to make your mental health diagnosis worse. Generally, it's going to create a lot more symptoms.
A lot more symptoms.
And so it's really helpful sometimes if you have a mental health challenge to be seeing a therapist, working on those underlying issues, and then have coaching be a complement to that, where we're helping work on the day-to-day of the things that you need to do to keep the ship afloat, to keep things running, to keep you feeling like you're on top of your life, and take those incremental steps to help you move forward. So some examples of that, we're going to track grades on a weekly basis. So that's something that typically students are not going to do through even an academic support center, with the exception of, for example, if you're a Division I athlete, they might have a system of tracking grades for like eligibility to make sure you're still eligible to participate in your sport. But aside from that, or sometimes the school will have a program for kids who are on academic probation where they need to maintain eligibility to stay in school, and they'll track their grades for that purpose. But that's a different sort of tracking. What we're doing is actually getting into the portal and saying, oh, look, here's your assignment that got posted. Here's the grade that you just got back on this exam. Let's look at the problems that you missed and see what we can learn from that and what your next steps are going to be. How are you going to study differently for next test? Or how are you going to go in and talk to your professor about these? Why did you miss them? Was it a content issue? Was it I misread the question because I was rushing through the exam? Like really trying to get to the bottom of that. So understanding and tracking grades is one big piece of coaching, because we have to talk about behaviors. What are you doing behaviorally to help you reach your goal? It's very goal oriented. We're not focusing on your disorder or your issue. We're focused on where do you want to go?
Right.
How are you going to get there?
Students come in and they say, I'm really trying to get X. How do I get there? And then you implement steps so that they can visually see the tracking and see the progress as they're becoming more successful in the classroom. And also that helps with the, extracurriculars too, I'm sure. So
absolutely.
It's much deeper than grades for sure.
Yes.
But I do think that's a big piece of it, because they want to be in a healthy education that allows them success. And a lot of times we need support to have that relationship with our academics.
And you can know what to do, but doing what you know is a very different thing, right? So you can get the idea of, okay, I should study more, but do you have the accountability set up to do that? Do you have the plan to set up to do that? It's a very different thing. It's like the idea of, I know I should exercise more, versus hiring a personal trainer to actually show up at the gym with you and make sure you do the workout. Like we're actually showing up to sit down with you and see what's your plan for the week. How are your grades doing? How are you tracking towards your goals? If you don't show up to that session, we're also going to call you. And if you don't show up and don't call us back, we're also going to get in touch with your family. So there's a level of accountability there when you sign up for coaching that you don't typically get through a school's program, just because they don't have the bandwidth to do that. If they're there and they have resources, and some schools have amazing resources, like the SALT Center, for example, right? They've got amazing resources for students. But most schools, by and large, they're going to have resources that are available if you take advantage of it. But if you don't show up to take advantage of it, they can't follow up with you. They don't have the bandwidth to call a student, and they don't actually have the authority to call a parent. They're typically limited by FERPA, and they can't reach out to a family.
They cannot.
So families will sometimes be totally in the dark. They have no idea how their kid's doing with their grades. They have no idea if their kid's showing up to tutoring or showing up to their counseling or not. They have no clue. And so we can help bridge that gap.
Yes, genius idea. I think every student going to college should have a coach, because that way the parent can absolutely know what's going on with the kid.
And they can have somebody to talk to, right? We can actually talk to the parent and say, hey, here's how things are going. Or we can answer questions from the parent. If the student goes home and they're sharing things with their parents that their parents are kind of concerned about, they can then feed that back to us. Like we believe in open communication, not from the perspective of we're going to tell on the student or we're going to spy on the student. That's not what it's about. It's about creating the support the student needs to be successful. And we believe part of that support is their family. And so to me, your family has to be in the loop about what's going on so that they can support you. Like, for example, we've had examples of students who are very depressed. And if we notice that they're getting depressed and they're showing up and they have symptoms of that, we can clue their parents in. And we've had parents go out and actually go fly to see their student or go drive over to see their student just to check in on them and how they're doing, because they have some clue that that's what's going on, because we let them know. Like, otherwise, how would they know that if their kid's not reaching out and telling them? So
well, and
those really
students are probably not going to get support. They might, in a new environment, be very afraid, and
it's intimidating.
worried.
They don't know who the people are.
Right.
They don't know who. It's just scary. And especially if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling even just that sense of like, I should be doing better and I'm not. And so you're kind of guilty and ashamed about that. The last thing you want to do is go reach out for support from some unknown person who you don't know if they're going to judge you or criticize you, or you don't want to go see your professor because you're already worried you're in trouble because you missed a class or two. And so it can spiral when you are putting that on a student to go take advantage of the resources themselves. You're putting a big expectation on them to be able to reach out. And some students really struggle to reach out for support.
Yeah, and I think off subject here, but I'm reading a book. It's The Ultimate Happiness Prescription by Deepak Chopra. And a lot of it is about the ego and the self-awareness and how that, they conflict in a way. And so, one thing that I find is really interesting is that whole idea of we crave approval, right? So we want to call home when we're doing great. We want to really, show people when we're academically our best, but we hear disapproval. And so that can be very difficult to go to a support center and ask for help. And it's just the whole shift in thinking. And so I do agree that it is really hard, and having a coach and somebody to really help maintain that open conversation and just knowledge of what needs to be done and how to get it done is critical. And I know that
I'm so glad you brought that up, actually, Wendy. I'm so glad you brought it up about the non-judgment, because that's actually a huge part of what makes coaching really different than some other supports that students might have. We talk to them about that. Our job as a coach is not to judge you. It's not to criticize you. It's not to show up and tell you that you're doing things wrong and that you have to do this better because I say so. That's not what it's about. It's about building self-awareness. And so we agree and talk to students in the very beginning about, we're going to approach this with you as a partner, as a collaborator. We're here to help you reach your goals, not to push you, not to force you, not to make you, because we don't have the power to do that. Let's be honest, right? We're not there. We can't force them. And as any parent of a teenager knows, you can't really force them to do anything anyway. You have the power of influence. You have the power of being able to support, but you can't force. And so I think when students realize, and we actually have it in our agreement with them that we talk about the very beginning on day one, is we're going to approach this whole process from a place of curiosity, here to support you, not judging, not criticizing, not shaming. If you mess up, we view mistakes as part of the process, because sometimes, if we all think back on our own lives, when have we made a mistake and what did we learn from that? Sometimes a mistake is a huge opportunity for learning. And that's actually when a lot of students come to see us, is when they've messed up, they've made a mistake, they've done badly on an exam, they've messed up a semester. I would much rather prefer they don't wait till then, that they come in and they're proactive and they reach out before that. But sometimes it takes that for a student to be aware. So we want to make sure that they feel from day one that this is a super safe space, exactly because of what you just said. Because then when they do hit an obstacle, or they do sleep through a class, or they do get forget an assignment, that they feel like they can come to us and say, oh my gosh, I messed up. And there's zero fear of judgment, because that's when they need coaching the most. And so that's why we have to lay that foundation from the very beginning, so that they can feel like they're open to reaching out to it when they need it.
And hearing the advice that you all are giving, I think that often the wins are fantastic. I mean, let's be honest, it definitely produces a lot of great things in our body to support health when done correctly. I think wins are amazing, but It's when we fail or when we make a mistake, if you really hone in on what that was and how that impacted your day, your week, that's when you win, because then you really learn.
Mm-hmm.
But when you win, it's like you won, it's over, you know? So I don't know.
Exactly.
It's an
Yeah, the
interesting
mistakes
concept.
are like it counters what you expect, right? You
Yes.
if you win, you did what you thought you would do, and then you got the result you expected. You didn't really learn anything.
No,
Versus
you
if you,
won.
yeah, you won, and it does feel great. But I kind of think of it as a win-win, right? We're either winning, we're succeeding because we got the result we were expecting, or we get a different result than we were expecting, so we're losing, but we're also learning something from that, and so that could
Yes.
end up being equally as valuable, if not more valuable in the long run, because then we end up learning so much from that experience because we didn't get the result we expected. So then that causes us to reevaluate and rethink like, wait, there's a gap between what I thought was going to work and what actually worked. And now I can learn something about myself or about the world. And that can be really helpful. So just thinking about that attitude, that's part of why we track grades actually. It's not just because we want them to be good, it's also because we
Right.
want students to learn. And a lot of students don't. They view grades as a threat or
Yes.
something to fear. And so they don't look at them. So then they just live in this place of fear and uncertainty because they have no idea how they're doing because it's scary to look. So
Scary.
we want to get in that routine of, okay, let's look and let's learn. It went
Yeah.
up. Great. What did we do that made it go up? It went down. Interesting. What made it go down? Like, let's figure that out and let's do it in real time before we get to midterms or finals or sometime when it's too late to actually learn anything useful because our semester's already over. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. You have to mind the gap. You
Yes.
gotta, you gotta see that clearly. So, no, that's fantastic. Let me ask you, do you recommend any specific things for parents, to look into, or books to read, or do you have any recommendations for parents that are sending their son or daughter to a university setting and might be a little bit fearful of what's going to happen next in the classroom?
That's a great question. So thinking about um, just like a student can have those fears coming up, a parent also can have a lot of fears coming up. So if we can identify, okay, what's the specific fear? Let's try to get zoomed in on what is that worry. Is it, I'm afraid they're not prepared. I'm afraid they're not going to have the support they need. I'm afraid of like they might not do well and I won't know about it. Like, what is it? What's the scenario that's really freaking you out? And then what can we do about that? So if it's, I'm afraid they're not going to have the support they need. Okay, well, how could we set up some support for them preemptively rather than waiting until it's too late in the semester to do anything about it? Or if I'm afraid that they're not going to do well and I'm not going to know about it, we talked a little bit earlier about how schools can't release information to families,
Yes,
but they
exactly.
can if the student signs a release. So
Yes.
if the student releases that information to the parent, then the parent will be able to get access to that information. So
Which
that
we
would be something.
recommend. I don't know if you
I
recommend
do too. I do too, actually, because and the reason why I actually it's a little bit of a weird way to think about it, but to me it feels unfair to the student to put them in a situation where they have to choose whether to get their parents' approval or whether to lie. Like
that.
it's a lot of pressure to put on a kid because if they're the only ones who can report on their grades, the parent's going to call, they're going to ask, how are you doing? And then the student has
Exactly.
a choice and they have to decide, do I potentially let my parent down and tell them something that's going to disappoint them, which I hate because more than anything, I want my parent to feel like I'm a good person and believe that I'm a good person. That's like what I want most deeply in the world. So I
Right.
either have to lose that or I have to lie to my parent and tell them it's okay. And a lot of students do what I call like telling the future truth, where they'll
Right.
say, I'm going to fix it. I know I've got a bad grade right now, but I'm going to make it better. So I'm going to tell my parent I'm okay because it will be true. As soon as I do XYZ things to fix
Yes.
it, it's going to be true that I'm okay. But then they've dug themselves in a hole and they'll say, oh yeah, I'm fine, everything's great. But then they don't do the things, or the things they thought were going to fix it don't fix it. And now they're in even deeper because now they're even worse off than they were before. But they've already dug themselves in a hole by telling their parent they're fine. So their risk of disapproval is even higher because then the
Yes.
parents can say, well, why didn't you tell me earlier? So they get in this cycle. And I don't think that's a fair cycle for a student to be in. It's too much pressure. I think it's unfair for them. And so I'd rather they just know my parent can see my grades. And
Yep.
so I don't have to face the choice of do I tell them or do I not?
Well, and then it doesn't have to be a point of conversation every time we're on
Mhm.
the phone or FaceTiming or sending an
Yeah.
email. Like that's not the focus. It's more about, what are you doing fun, the activities, who have you
Mhm.
met, the good stuff. The other good stuff. I mean, academics are good,
Exactly.
but it's a financial commitment. And I know that students, everybody that I work with, they always are fearful that, my parents are going to spend X. What if
Mhm.
it's not successful? What if I want to come home? I mean, there are a lot of what
Mhm.
ifs as you
Right.
transition in. So you bring up some real valid points. Now, I know you work with students nationwide, and
Mhm.
you have a virtual platform like myself and in person as well, correct?
Mhm.
So tell me, what's the best way for families to get in touch with you or your company?
It's super easy. So they would just go to our site, Creating Positive Futures, and I'm sure we can put a link below the video too. We've got some resources for families whose kids are transitioning to college. There's a life skills checklist, which is maybe helpful to think about as students are starting to get ready to transition to college. I actually don't think there's a too early to think about that because that's part of what makes college hard. It's not it's yes, it's the academics, and it's that you have all of the other skills of life piled on top of that. All of a sudden, you've got to do your laundry, you've got to keep up with
Got to
if you're taking a
eat.
car to campus, you got to eat, you got to shower, you got to like all these things with no prompts and no reminders. You got to get your medications refilled or your
Yes.
supplements or whatever you're taking. Like so many day-to-day responsibilities
Yes.
that a parent was there to support you with before, and now they're not. And that in and of itself can be overwhelming. So thinking ahead about what are the life skills my kid maybe doesn't have that I would like them to have before they go off to college. We have a whole checklist of that parents can go through. And we also have a series of questions about what to think through before you get to campus for your freshman year that also might be helpful. So I'll send you both those links so you can share
Okay, that'd
those
be
with
great. I'll put
families.
that up. That'd be
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah.
Well,
And then
I
we talk
can't
to
thank
families all the time, so
yes.
if they have questions, if I always think of it as our job is to help families get the support they need and to help students be successful. Either we can help or we will know someone who can help because we've been around a long time. So if we're not the right support, or if it's best to start with your students' campus center, or if it's best to go get an assessment to see if there is a diagnosis y'all are dealing with, or whatever the next steps are, we can help point you in the right direction. So if a family is stuck and they're not sure what to do, or if their kid even needs support, and they just want to talk about it, we love having conversations with families and just helping them figure out what's next because this whole process can be very stressful and overwhelming. And so our job, I think, of as just getting them with the right resource, whether that's us or somebody else, is less important than just making sure they have a plan that they feel really confident about.
Agreed. I think that's one reason why for so many years you and I have worked so well together is that we do
Mm-hmm.
want the best for our families. And oftentimes that's pointing them into another direction that they never even thought of. And it's not necessarily that they need us, but now they've got the tools to go forward and get those answers. So
Mm-hmm.
thank you so much. I appreciate everything that you and your team do for our students. It's been great to have, and the support is unlike anywhere else. So truly thank you. And like I said, I'll put all the show notes in, but before we go, I want to ask you, as I ask everybody that comes on here, what brings you the most joy in your everyday life?
Oh, what a fun question. Oh gosh, I would have to say our little boy, Aiden, he's 19 months now. It took us a while to get to be parents, so we're really enjoying this whole journey, and he's just delightful. He makes me happy every day, and I love spending time with him. So I would say that's a
I think
thing
that's
that
a good
brings me
answer.
joy.
That your own children bring you joy is a great answer. So
Now, once he gets to be a teenager, who knows if that'll still be true, but for right now, it's
So
really,
I can
really
tell you
wonderful.
as a mother of three that you have these joyful moments for maybe some of the pain that comes with the teen years, but it's really not that painful because like, you love your child. So they
Mhm.
are the joy of light. I will tell you, it's amazing. And I was out with two of my three at Chick-fil-A over the weekend, and there was this little kid that I was laughing, like belly laugh. And my two, who are much older, were eating it up. They were turning around, they were playing with them. And I thought to myself,
Aw.
this is great insight into the type of dads they're going to be. They're seeing the joy in other people's children, which I think is excellent. So anyways, kids are fantastic. That's why we do what we do. We love them.
Exactly.
Supporting and helping them. Well, thank you again. I appreciate it. And I'm sure I'll have you back on in the future to talk about many other.
Anytime.
Okay. Have a good day.
Thanks so much, Wendy. You too.